Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Tegan Rabuano. I'm the Inclusion and Diversity Associate at the One Club for Creativity, and I am so excited to welcome you to today's conversation, Spill the Tea, How to Make the Creative Industry More Trans Inclusive. So we are putting this event on today in recognition of Trans Awareness Week. So for those who don't know, GLAAD defines Trans Awareness Week as a week when transgender people and their allies take action to bring attention to the community by educating the public about who transgender people are, sharing stories and experiences, and advancing advocacy around the issues of prejudice, discrimination, and violence that affects the transgender community. So today's discussion, it's going to be centered around the team at McCann who worked on MasterCard's True Name campaign. And so I'm really excited to pass it over and let our awesome panelists introduce themselves today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Guerin, and I manage marketing and communications for MasterCard in North America. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm just thrilled to be here with you today to share our story of how we're focused on trans awareness. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Pete Jones. I'm an Executive Creative Director at McCann XBC. McCann XBC is a part of McCann World Group, and we are solely devoted to our MasterCard clients, which we have been since 1997. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm also very delighted to be here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lucas Kriegler, and I also work at McCann, McCann World Group in New York City. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm an ACD, Associate Creative Director, and I'm very happy to be here as well.
Great. So before we get started with our conversation, I'm going to share with you all the ad for the True Name campaign so you can all see what we're going to be discussing today.
For transgender people, a secure payment doesn't mean protecting yourself from someone buying sneakers with your card. No, if you're transgender, a secure payment means paying for something without being judged, questioned, disrespected, humiliated, harassed, even assaulted, simply because the name on your card doesn't match how you identify. This is about more than just keeping a card safe. It's about keeping us safe. True Name by MasterCard, the first card that allows you to display your chosen name because that's who you truly are.
Awesome. That is so moving. So, first and foremost, I really want to hear the story of how this True Name campaign came to be. So who initially proposed the idea? Where was this born from?
I can speak to that a little bit. So this is honestly a project that has been near and dear to my heart because it is actually based on a personal experience, a lived truth that I live day in and day out of my life. I'm a transgender male, and I came out a few months before making the move out here from LA to New York. And I had been on hormones starting at McCann only a couple months in. So I wasn't completely passing per se, and passing to those of you who don't know what that means, it just means that your outside appearance is matching kind of your gender identity. And so I wasn't personally passing as a male at the time, which is how I identified. So I didn't have a beard. I was masculinizing a little bit, but I was kind of in that in-between phase personally for me. And I hadn't changed my name legally on my credit cards yet, or my bank cards. So I went out to lunch, although McCann, and we'll get into this in a bit, but totally welcomed me with open arms and has completely respected my gender the entire time. But, when you get out into the real world, things, sometimes get a little dicey. But I went out to lunch with a coworker a couple years ago, and we were walking into a deli, the hustle and bustle of Manhattan. It was, obviously peak lunch hour. People were kind of just being ushered through the line. I walked up to the counter. I ordered a sandwich. I went to pay. I paid with my credit card that had my old name on it. And, I thought that I could kind of get in and out of there unscathed, but all of a sudden I realized that everybody against the wall was kind of waiting for their order. And I realized nobody had a number and they didn't give me a number. And all of a sudden people the guy at the counter just starts calling people's names out. And of course, like right after that, my name, my dead name, or my name given to me at birth was just echoing across the entire deli. And it was awful. My heart dropped. Obviously, it's a feminine name. It's not how I identify at all. I was completely outed in the moment. I felt like everybody was just staring at me, kind of like, who is this person? What are you? Kind of went through my head. So I grabbed the lunch and kind of bolted out of there, and I never stepped foot in that deli again. And, it's not their fault. That's just how they were, instructed to run their business. But for me, it was just a mortifying moment. And shortly thereafter, a pride brief for MasterCard was put on my desk. And, this experience popped top of mind. And I didn't even know if it was legally possible to do this, but I said, why not? I'm just, this is an issue that I've had, and I'd love to see if it's possible to put your chosen name on the front of your card, your MasterCard. And that's kind of where the ball started, getting rolling. And I presented it with my partner to Pete, and we kind of stuck it to the wall, and it was amongst a bunch of other things. And the interesting thing is that, it had a question mark on it after we presented it. And I didn't know what that meant. I honestly just thought that it was a maybe, like, oh, maybe this is a good idea, but we have better stuff, how it works in the ad world. So, but, it was actually my partner at the time who kind of pointed to it and said, what about this idea? Isn't it great? And I realized the question mark was actually that they didn't understand it. And that's a really interesting thing for me because I live it every day, right? So to me, it's just second nature. I got it. But it turned out, just with a little bit of explaining, it took 2 seconds for Pete to just be like, yes, I get it. That's an incredible thing for you to share. And then he took it and ran with it. So I appreciate it.
I do remember the question mark. And that was one of the first of many questions that I had and have never stopped asking about things that I've never gone through. So I think that's going to be something that we talk about a lot. But at the same time, Lucas, I do remember the one pager. I still have it on my desktop. And I just want to let you know, first of all, it was called Preferred Card. And then we worked on the name, and also it was idea number 3, not number 1.
Wow.
What Lucas just described was so powerful. And for him to put it into one slide, there was something about it. And it was just the beginning of many allies who were going to try to make this happen. And the one thing that I do remember, and I'll never forget, was the line that he had on this one slide, is that you can put a picture of your cat, you can put a logo of your college alma mater on your credit card, but you cannot put your true name on the front. And I thought that just couldn't leave that statement there. So that was the beginning, and then there was a lot of work to be done, and eventually we created a pitch video, and that was actually the idea of Pierre Lipton, our global ECD, to really bring out the emotion and tell the stories that come to life in a video and not just on a slide. So we created that video and went down to the Pride Parade to get stories like Lucas's and just present this idea. It was just an idea, and see the reaction. And the reactions were genuine, enthusiastic, and people were very excited about this kind of change. So we brought the video to Cheryl, and that's when it really took off. Right, Cheryl?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they showed me the video and it was an instantaneous reaction of, oh my God. When you find out that there's a pain point on your product and that you're potentially causing someone pain, and you hear the story that Lucas just shared, it was an instantaneous, oh my gosh, we have to figure out how to do this. It was not even a question for us. And by the way, the brilliance of that pitch video, to hear multiple people telling their story in different ways and what it meant. And to some people, it meant, safety, right? Because you have to protect my identity. And if you don't, it could be life-threatening to me. For others, it was about self-expression. One of the proud moments, if all of you remember the first time you get a credit card, and it is a proud moment, but it can't be if the name doesn't represent who you are and let you express who you are. So this was instantaneous for us. Then the challenge became, okay, now how do we actually get this done? And yeah, I mean, we could tell that story if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to hear, because what I really love about this campaign is how it came from an authentic place. It came from the needs of the trans community. And, Lucas, you touched on this, having your birth name or your dead name be shared without your knowledge or in a setting where you're unfamiliar, it can be, a really traumatizing or truly a potentially dangerous situation. I actually also, I went through the name change process myself a few years ago, but before that, it's a constant worry of, is someone going to find out? Am I going to kind of be outed in this moment? And also it can be very painful as a trans person to hear a name that kind of, in many ways was forced onto you, to be referred to that. It can be a painful experience. And so, Lucas, I want to know, as we kind of talk more about how this came to be and how it came together, how important was it to you to be part of a supportive and inclusive team at McCann, one that encouraged you with this project?
Oh, it was beyond, because, this isn't just for me. Not only is McCann and MasterCard, not only are they supporting me as an individual in my experience, you touched on it. I was out, I came out in LA, I was in a bubble there. I can't, and I've been transitioning in New York, another bubble. I'm in a safety, a safer part of the country, but this card, and what it's going to do to help people, truly avoid some really, really scary, possibilities that could happen to our trans community. If you're out in the middle of a really, unaccepting state, outed, anything could happen. Trans women of color, some of the top, at-risk community in the US, and how that goes, and it's just horrible. So it's so meaningful to me that they not just heard me. And I try all the time to make sure that everybody knows that I'm trying to speak on behalf of these other people. It's not me just speaking. And that's why even the pitch video was so important, to get the other perspectives on this, because, and to just see, and it filled my heart too, to just see how much of a need it really was. For me, it's avoiding a little bit of an embarrassment, but for others, it's truly, it could save a life. So it means the world to me.
That's awesome. And Pete, I love how you talked about, the importance of asking questions. I think oftentimes allies or people who are working on these projects are afraid or intimidated to ask questions about things they may not know. And while of course it's important to be sensitive, if you don't ask the questions or you don't do the research, you're never going to gain that knowledge. You're never going to be able to really engage in these conversations. And so, what was it like for you to support this project as an ally? What was that experience like?
Well, first of all, I always feel excited with every new project that we do with MasterCard that has anything to do with inclusivity. That is something that the company has always believed in. And I feel like the brand really wanted to go beyond just being a sponsor of Pride Week. And that was genuine. So it was a matter of us, answering that call with the right people, and including Lucas and a great group of diverse people from the Q group, as you're going to hear about, I'm sure, again. But it is a matter of asking questions, asking questions and listening some more. Because if you don't, you're just going to fill in your own blanks and probably not make any progress. And that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the agency, doesn't help Cheryl and her team, and it doesn't help the people who are facing, a problem that happens in their lives every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pete hit on something really important, because we wanted to move from, for years we had supported Pride, and we had a campaign, Acceptance Matters, and we were out there letting people share stories. We were sharing stories, and it was a wonderful campaign, and it made a statement. And then I would say, then we said, we're going to start doing experiences, and we actually created the bathroom for all humans at the Pride experience, right? If you have a heartbeat, you could enter this bathroom, right? It doesn't matter. And so we went into experiences, but honestly, we moved the campaign, the Priceless campaign overall, to something that would be more action oriented overall. And we said, there's no more just saying things, we're gonna do. What are the actions we could take? So we created a new tagline with McCann, of course, start something priceless. And that was part of the brief for Pride. Like, how do we not just show up for Pride? And it was important to be there and continue to show our support, but how do we really take action? And lo and behold, everything that we do starts with an insight, and Lucas shined a light on something so important, an amazing insight.
I love that. And I love what you talked about there with, really taking an actionable step. As, Pride has become bigger and bigger, there's been a lot of criticism. In the month of June, there are companies and organizations who, will put out a Pride ad or will turn something rainbow, but then as soon as the month is over, their commitment ends there. It's not a real commitment, but with this campaign, you're really putting your money where your mouth is, doing something that's going to be impactful to the trans community year round. And that's why, for me, I love that so much. So, now thinking about how this went from idea to execution, I'm curious to know what kind of internal discussions were had before approaching this campaign. How did you decide what team members were going to work on it? How did you begin to approach that?
I tell you, we kept this like a really small team. And so we have a team member in marketing that also runs the Pride BRG for our team. So passionate overall and a wonderful marketer. So it's like no brainer. You're going to be, he saw the idea and was like, how do we do this? How do we do this now? And so him, our communications lead in North America. And honestly, we just started going around the company to see, how do we get this done? Because the most interesting thing about MasterCard is we're this big consumer brand, but we're not a direct to consumer product. Everything goes through a bank. So there's or a merchant. There's nothing almost that we could do on our own. So we said, how do we get this done? And interestingly enough, you'd go through every product person you would go to. They didn't know exactly what to do because there wasn't a real technology fix for us. So we immediately resolved that there's no security issue. The name on the card was not a secure element anymore. We have chips on the card. We have all this security functionality. The name is not a secure element. So that we ruled out. Then, we figured, over the years, the name has become less and less important. We already had changed our rules, having nothing to do and not even knowing this insight yet. we told banks you don't have to have a signature panel on the back of the cards anymore, and we told merchants you no longer have to have a signature at the point of this at the point of sale, which is why even today you see some have done it, some haven't, but we've rolled this out. So the name really became not so important. It really is about presentment. And so, this wasn't a tech fix, this was a process fix. And when you go to sign up for a card, you have to now ask for a preferred name. And then in the background, we could still have a legal name that ties back to credit checks and, ensures you are who you are when you sign up for the card. But what an interesting, Pete would call, like, how are you doing? Have we broken through? Are we there yet? It took time just because it wasn't a technology fix, which is what people often think of. That's how you fix everything these days. Nonetheless, we decided to launch once we spoke to a couple of issuers that could do this with us. We said coming soon. We knew we were coming out with a bank, BMO Harris. And so they launched, we announced in June, we launched in December with BMO Harris Bank. And then just a few weeks ago, we launched with Citibank, and we're so excited. And they already, they announced the support that they're getting and the response rates that we've been getting in just a short amount of time. It was 1,600 people had applied for this offering in just like a week. So it's remarkable. It's really gratifying to see this come to life.
Yeah, that is amazing. It's so great to hear that it's a success so far. And it's really interesting to know, that sometimes making changes like this, it's different, it's deeper than it may seem. And so now I'm thinking, with the ad that we watched at the beginning of this conversation, when it came to the creation of that, and that aired this past summer, what steps were taken to ensure that it remained inclusive to the community that it was representing? Who was working on that? How did you get the actors who were trans to participate? What was it like pulling that together?
It was the same, I'm not going to say same process, but just relying on our diverse group of people, creatives, producers, even outside the agency, the production company. We wanted to make sure that we had the right director who understood the sensibilities and the importance. And then we had to make sure that the casting agency was an agency that was at the top of their game in finding authentic people from the community who had similar stories like Lucas. And we want to retain that authenticity. And just make sure that the stories that we were telling beyond the commercial, but also on social, that were a reflection of the problem that we were trying to solve.
And I will say I'm still in touch with all of the talent that was in this commercial, and they are just thrilled. I know obviously it also meant something even deeper to them, but being trans and marginalized, we unfortunately we don't get as many opportunities, and so to just be able to employ some of these gig workers, if you will, SAG actors and actresses, and it just meant the world to them on so many different levels. And it's really great. And just to be able to tell their stories, I don't know, it's lovely.
I love that. Yeah. And it really, just watching that, it's very moving. You can tell that it's coming from a really authentic place. So Cheryl, you touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious, what has the general response been like from both the trans community and, others at large? Has there been any backlash? Has it been primarily really positive? What's that been like?
So it has been primarily positive, but I have to tell you, when we went into this, we knew not everybody was going to agree with our views, but it didn't matter. That didn't matter. It's about being decent at our core. If you know there's a problem or a pain point with your product, with anyone, you have to fix it. And so I would tell you in social media, yeah, there was some negative responses, I have to say, but the overwhelming positive feeling and beliefs just drowned that out. And, you touched on the commercial, I think, when we talk about True Name, it does warm my heart too. We talk about it, it just feels so good. When you see that story, you actually put yourself in someone's shoes and understand for just a moment the pain they might be going through. And I think the power that this story to be able to actually understand somebody that you didn't understand before is really powerful. And so I have to tell you, these are conversations we had. We knew we would get some negative response. We didn't care. This is the way it's supposed to be. You do the right thing, and you should be decent as a company. And if we can make change and influence change for the better, that's what we're going to do.
And I want to add on to that, as most of you might know, hate is really based in fear of what you don't know. And so, just taking a stand, like for MasterCard to just take a stand and say, we are with these people and getting our stories out there, we're going to be chipping away. And yeah, there's going to be haters because they don't get it. They don't understand. But the more you're exposed to something and the more we're out there telling our stories, the more it becomes a normal part of people's lives and much more normalized. So that's just such a huge step and very brave of MasterCard to do for us as a community. So thank you.
And I have to tell you, the demand for the card product, the minute we announced, we announce products all the time. I've never seen such demand and interest to understand more. So, I just think it's a positive step overall. And the fact that so many woke up and said, oh, I want to join in with MasterCard and figure this out. And we have many more banks rolling out in our pipeline. So it's really exciting.
I just wanted to add to that part, to what Cheryl spoke about earlier. Yes, a lot of people don't know that you just don't walk up to a bank or whatever. Can I have a MasterCard? It's a Citibank MasterCard or a Bank of America MasterCard. For the brand to introduce a product that is such a life changer, it's like putting someone on the moon in this category. It was a major effort, and we watched MasterCard really walk the walk, and particularly Cheryl, who can really get, just invincible, and really help push this over the top. If not for that one bank, the dominoes probably wouldn't be falling as quickly, but that was a major, major step in this process and making it a reality.
Awesome. And then, Lucas and Pete, we're talking a lot here about, the importance of education, raising awareness. So what advice do you both have for other agencies who are tackling a campaign that may feature members of the LGBTQ community, and more specifically, the trans community, which, has been more visible than ever in these last few years? How would you advise others to kind of approach this with the same care and intentionality that you have with this?
Well, I can kind of speak a little to this. First of all, I just wanted to give, I think we might have touched on it, but we have a great internal team who can help guide us when it comes to LGBTQ representation. It's called McCann Q. It's a subset, and they're great. We vetted scripts through them just to make sure. Even though I was the trans guy, but there's other voices in our community as a whole, and just making sure that we were doing it right and properly representing people. So I completely would advise other agencies out there to kind of get any marginalized group within your agency and try to form a panel of them to be able to run things by. I think that fact checking is so important when it comes to other people's stories. And it's funny you should ask about just trans representation in general. I just did a huge presentation on how to best represent trans people in in advertising. And a lot of it is just, you know, look at us as normal people. Like we use toilet paper, you know, like we use, you know, beauty products, and it's really important to just kind of, you know, see us as anybody else. You know, you're marketing to us, you can use us in advertisements. It doesn't always have to be about being trans either. And if it is about being trans and you out the person as being trans in your spot, obviously make sure that you're doing it in a way that it makes sense for the storyline, you know, and makes sense that, you know, your product, it really links up your product benefit and the reason that somebody is trans and outed in your spot. You know, there's so many do's and don'ts, and maybe I'll share that presentation with everybody at some point. But yeah, you know, we're just normal people, and normalizing us and is really important. And I love the fact too that being an advertiser, you know, I think about this all the time, just like, what is masculinity? What is femininity? What does that mean? You know, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to your audience? And really, we as advertisers and these marketers, we have the power to shape other people's views on what it means to be masculine, what it means to be feminine, etc. You know, and it's such a powerful thing. And, you know, we should not be abusing that. We should not be falling into the stereotypes that men are not supposed to cry, or, you know what I mean? And women are supposed to have, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's just really something to think about and be proud that we have this power, but be very careful with it and what we do with it, because it's sending a message to the youth of tomorrow, you know? And it's just really important to keep that in mind. But anyways, that was my little side note on the trans representation.
Yes, that is so true though. Pete, what about you? What advice do you have for others?
I don't know how I follow Lucas, you know, with you know, what he's speaking from is from the heart, but also a reality, I think, at the agency. The Q group we mentioned earlier is such a great asset and resource, but it should really feel more like the norm. And, you know, there are some ways to go, but what I feel like the strength is with the Q group is that they come from all disciplines of the agency, all members from the LGBTQ community, but there's a strategist next to a producer, next to an account person, next to a creative. And so there's diversity within diversity within diversity. And they don't, I've sat in these meetings, Lucas, and I know you'll agree, you guys don't always agree. You, as a group, don't always agree, but the insights are so impactful. And that's the only way to, I guess, to push brands forward with true insights from a really strong group.
That's great. That's great. And Cheryl, you know, from your point of view, what advice do you have for other companies who want to be allies to the trans community, you know?
I think it's about human understanding, right? I think we've been, you know, blessed to have the Priceless campaign, as Pete said, for many years now, 23 years. Everything that we do that is really meaningful comes from meaningful human insights. That's where this belongs. And actually, you know, especially today, you know, it's not just about function. You can't win just with function. It has to connect in a human way to your cardholders. And so, one, it's to be authentic. Two is to understand the real insights in people, and then, you know, fight like hell to make it happen, because not everybody fully understands, and it just takes a little time and resilience to pull that off. And I can tell you, as a brand, we've actually created a diversity council for marketing internally as well. So, you know, that's something, it's exactly what Pete and Lucas were talking about across the board, to understand the intersectionality, to understand people and their thinking, and to bounce ideas around. It's really important. So, you know, it will be the norm to Pete's point someday, but in the meantime, some of these processes need to be put in place to make sure we all advance.
That's great. That's great. Well, this has been amazing. We actually have some questions now. We'll go into some Q&A from our attendees. And if you have questions and you haven't put them in that Q&A chat yet, make sure that you add them. But this first question, really interested in this one. This says, what kind of questions are no-goes? And I'm assuming that this is going back to Pete, what we were talking about with, not being afraid to ask questions, because it's true. There can be times where a question to a trans person may come across as invasive or inappropriate. So I guess I'd love to get some thoughts from you all on this. What kind of questions are no-goes?
Well, that kind of goes back to what I was talking about. Like, is there a reasoning, a very solid, direct reasoning for asking the question? It's interesting because I'm a very open person. I've come from a very supportive, loving family. I have a great support system of friends. I am not. I'm one of the few. Very few in our community have, and so you have to be really respectful. And I think that the biggest thing in our community, we say, if you're going to ask about our parts, just like think before you ask, and would you mind if I asked you about yours? Essentially, it's just, that's common nature. It's just like, there's no reason to go there. Does it, unless, you're going to be romantically involved with this person, there's absolutely no reason to know what is happening. And I think, that's obviously the biggest one, but, just being gentle and trying. I can read people personally if it's coming from a loving, genuinely concerned or a place of love that is genuine and wants to know because they want to do better as an ally. I can accept some of the more colorful questions, but and obviously don't ask a stranger. Make sure that you know this person as a friend before you get into like really personal questions like that. But when it comes to advertising, obviously it's like now we're actually talking about there's a lot of things going on in the ad world about guys who have their periods still, and it's an interesting topic that's come up a lot, and just how to market that. And when you're talking about that for anybody, it's pretty sensitive, but just in the room, and if you're in a brain bash session and you have a trans person in there, just be respectful and maybe not try to ask outwardly any embarrassing things.
Yeah, and I'll also say on that topic, obviously we're living in an age where information is more accessible than ever. So,
Yeah.
If you have a question and you're like, is this maybe going to be inappropriate? Maybe look it up on the internet first. I'm sure the answer is there. And then if you can't find it, then reach out to a person. That's always a good place to start. There's so much information these days that you can find online. So we have another really, really great question. This one says, what advice do you give to others trying to sell in work to a more conservative client?
That's, I think that it's a great question. I think you have to have the insights to justify why you're bringing this to them. And then second, what's the business objective? And what kind of problem will it solve? And therefore move the brand forward. So I think you have to really sort of set up the reasoning. You don't want to just propose an idea that's a little, non-conservative for the sake of being non-conservative. It has to serve the brand, it serve a purpose, and hopefully serve society. So have the insights. And this one that came from Lucas was one of those that that really helped us. And then Cheryl and her team, embraced it and made it happen.
I think the purpose and going back to the objective and what is it adding? Like, I found some things presented to me over time, like, and this has nothing to do with this brief. This was like the perfect situation, and it just, it's the best, most gratifying thing that could have ever happened in my career, frankly. And, the other side of it is I would look at a commercial and somebody would want to throw something in just for shock value. And it was no reason for it, nor did it add to the story. Did it take away from the communication overall? So I think going back to what's the purpose and where we started, the client, and then what is for us, this works because of so many reasons. But, if I told you, we talk every day about decency at our core and inclusion and diversity, it's just who we are. And so, but I do think it starts with the proper brief and not just doing something to do something.
Totally. Great. And then we have another question about the timeline of this whole process. So from that first concept board to True Name cards being a tangible product in the world, how long did that take?
Oh, Cheryl, how long was it?
So I would say, there was probably a good several months between, when they presented it to when we figured out how to be able to do this. And then once we were able to figure out how we were able to do this, we then sold it into a bunch of issuers, right? So it took like a sales process, then they had to change their processes. But if I tell you, because normally it would take a pretty decent amount of time to come to market for MasterCard with the product overall, think about it. The merchant point of sale has to all change and the issuers have to issue a product. It takes a long time. This one was pretty fast. It was probably it was all within a single year, seeing the concept and then the sell-in internally, the sell-in, externally with partners. And then honestly, we made a conscious decision that the product wasn't ready yet, but we were going to announce it because it became an influencer campaign. Then we got a whole bunch of issuers that wanted to be part of it. So we made some conscious decisions to advance it further. Even to the point of whoever's first to come on board, we're going to integrate you in our advertising, by the way. So we were pushing and finding, reasons, to say all the reasons to say yes and move it forward and no reasons to say no. And so, yeah, it was pretty quick especially for, the fact that we go to market B2B2C.
Wow. Yeah, that was much quicker than even I was thinking in my head. So awesome. And then, so another question that we got, it says, how do you bring more trans voices into the room? It seems like the best insights come from those of trans experience. I love that question. What are our thoughts on that? How to get more trans people in the room?
That's a tough one because, I know a lot of trans people, but, if we're talking about just like focus groups and whatnot, it's always good to just tap into the trans people that in your life and then see if they know people, because it just depends on what way. Like if we're talking about like concepting, or if we're talking about like panelists or like consultants, or what I mean, there's so many different types of people. And being trans, I've talked about this before, like just as we are like everybody else, we all have different lived experiences. We're completely, just because we're all trans doesn't mean we're all super close too. You know what I mean? Like it's just, so I know a lot of trans people, but the other thing is that there's unfortunately, I'm very, very aware of, my privilege, and not just now, not just being a male now, presenting as a male, but also presenting as a white male. It's just like, I'm really trying to bring up other people in our community that haven't had the opportunities that I have had. Unfortunately, a lot of people just haven't had kind of the experiences and the training to do, to be like, I guess, in advertising. My friends are always asking like, is there anybody that you can bring on, that we can hire. And, you know, it's hard because a lot of these kids, they come out so young and then they get kicked out of their homes and they don't have the college experience and they don't, you know, so a biggest thing that I would say is help train some of these people, you know, you know, have them tour your agency, bring them in to give them the experience and mentor some of them, because they've had to turn to different ways to survive when they get kicked out. And it's just so sad. But yeah, I don't know. There's so many different ways to bring them in, I guess is what I'm getting at, you know.
I know, you know, and Lucas and Pete, you'll remember this. We worked with New York City, so the Department of Human Rights. And we did outreach through that department, and we were able to further speak to more of the community and leverage them for video and storytelling. And, you know, and also they were partners with us in actually putting a street sign up that was just amazing. We called it Acceptance Street, and it was the Gay Street sign. And we added in New York City to Gay Street, you know, all the designations, of course, including transgender. And, you know, and so we did a lot of work with the city, who also, you know, wanted to create better awareness and a better community for the city. And so that's another way as well.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. That's really important. It can be tricky, you know, sometimes with the trans community to do outreach, but we're out there. If you look hard enough. So another question, have other brands or credit cards adopted this idea? I'm also really interested to know, has anyone else picked this up since this has come out?
So we haven't seen our competitors pick it up yet. And, you know, I tell you though, it is our goal that this just be the way it is. You know, a lot of things that we do in our industry, there's industry standards. When you go to a point of sale, there's not, here's the machine for MasterCard and here's the machine for the others. It's one, you know, standard. And I think this will ultimately become a standard, to be honest with you, because it's the way it should be. So we're not there yet, but we'll get there. In the meantime, I'm thrilled that MasterCard is the one to be out there first and being the leader in this space.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to wrap up. We have just a couple more Q&A questions. So if there are any more last minute questions, we have about 10 minutes left if you want to throw your question in. But last couple that we have here. So what are your tips on not making spots that normalize rather than making things about being an inspiration? So I guess, you know, thinking about the way that the trans community is being portrayed, how can you work to create content that is going to, you know, represent the community authentically, rather than, I guess, making them seem kind of, you know, like
othered, I guess, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so there is a fine line. It's very hard, and I would say again, like, try to vet as many trans people as you can that you know, to make sure that you're not, you know, misrepresenting. But you know, there is a fine line between being exploitative and kind of like really tapping into like our traumas versus like celebrating us. And I would say, if you can, you know, I know I've been talking about the woe is me stuff, but there's also like, we have a lot of really beautiful things that happen to us, and being able to live and discover who you are is probably the most freeing thing, you know, to ever happen to me. And I've never been so happy in my life, like having transitioned and being centered and being seen to be, you know, who I am. And there's a lot of just really beautiful, uplifting moments that you can tap into in that sense. So I would say, as long as it's not in a negative light and not in an exploitative light, you know, just for the purposes of kind of like gawking, or as Cheryl said, just kind of shock value. I think that there's a balance that can be reached within that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. I think you said it, Tegan, is authenticity is so important. You know, consumers they're a lot smarter than you think. And you cannot try to portray something that is either exploitative or used in an unauthentic way. The subject matter has to be real. The people have to be real. So exactly what Lucas said, but the key is authenticity.
Awesome. And then we have another Q&A question here. It says, as a trans person in creative advertising, I'd love to hear more on how has your agency made the space for these conversations and ideas in the brainstorming space? Can you speak more about how you've created and ushered this environment of inclusion within your team?
Well, yeah, that definitely exists. I've sat in on them, and I think the inclusion has grown greatly. I've been a McCann for more years than I care to mention, and I've just seen, inclusivity just blossom, and the diverse people with diverse ideas are just making us stronger. I mean, our agency is responsible for Fearless Girl and Disables for IKEA, first responders for Verizon, and it's just people are coming at it from different angles, and we need diverse thoughts more than ever.
I think this point, and you've talked about it with McCann Q, of reaching into the agency. So it's so, when you have an agency that you work with, these are the people that you work with every day. This is your team. This is your MasterCard team. And I've been lucky to have Pete with me for many years as well, that I've been at MasterCard. And so, which is great. But when you have a certain brief and it's hitting on a very specific audience or some nuances, reach it. What McCann has done, and not just with this, but even we have a women entrepreneurs campaign. They reach into the agency and they bring in creative talent that where this resonates, so women that have run their own businesses were brought in, and and this makes for a more authentic experience. And the same way on the other side, where we do that within our company too, working and showing work to our BRGs and bringing them in early. So this is important that we break the sort of mold of how we traditionally do things all the time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we have one final question for you all before we wrap up this amazing conversation today. And so, a lot of people don't know a trans person in real life. So they do rely on things like ads and TV and film to shape their perception of the trans community. Lucas, you touched on this, but I want to hear from you all. What do you think really is the power of representation, and how can we continue to move forward in this area? I know it's a lighthearted question.
Yeah, I'm just, it's funny that you started that out as so many people don't know a trans person in real life, because I always like to kind of come back and say, well, do you, or do you not know that they're trans? A lot of us, you have no idea how many of us are out there. I mean, I think there's like 2 million identifying trans people. And, I'm in a Facebook group. It's called Living Stealth, meaning that they pass and nobody knows that they're trans. So just be cautious of that too when you're out and about, because you just don't know who's listening. And I have a female experience up until I was 35, and I'll just say that, being in a male bathroom now and hearing some of the things that guys talk about women is not, just be careful, because you don't know, but that isn't even what what the question was. I could talk about this forever, but yeah, representation is just, it's important to just treat us like anybody else. Like I said, that the point of that is that we just, we're normal people, and I think we deserve the same opportunities. And I think we can represent any brand just as any other cisgender person could. So.
Agree. Authenticity. And I still think telling these stories for us, most important is to get this right so that you're telling the story in a way that other people understand. And I think this is why we got so much positivity, because people could, people change their views. They understand better. They, learn what it's like, and that you realize, yes, real people, and, feelings and, all of this. And so just making sure you tell the right stories becomes so important. So action first, and then how you tell the story surrounding this is so important.
Yeah, just the last thought was that I've been lucky to work on a lot of great projects with the Priceless campaign. And this one stood out because it was beyond an ad. It was beyond advertising. It was one of those ideas where everything would just fall into place. And I don't mean that in like a simplistic, logistic way, but just the way that the thoughts manifested and the social just distributed. And the fact that Cheryl's talking about how banks, I'll use the phrase, knocking down doors to issue this card. There's so much that we talked about today, but the result is when you come up with something that goes beyond advertising.
Yeah, and solves a problem for our community. It's the biggest thing, think deeper about whatever your brand is, and see if there's a way that even a small change as a name on a card can change somebody's life, and I think that there's opportunities within every brand to think deeper about and step outside of your own experience, so.
Amazing. All right. So before we wrap up, I do just want to touch on one more thing with Trans Awareness Week. Obviously, education is vital, but if you're an ally and you're checking this out right now, it's also important that you put your money where your mouth is, just like this group of people. So make sure you check out some more resources. And as Lucas mentioned, trans women of color, specifically Black trans women, are the most vulnerable in our community. So really quickly, I'll just share a few organizations that you can check out after this that directly benefit Black trans people. So the Okra Project, the Marsha P. Johnson Institute. For the girls, it's Girls, GWORLS, the Black Trans Travel Fund, and then the Black Trans Femmes in the Arts Collective. Check out these organizations, keep these conversations going. Cheryl, Pete, Lucas, thank you all so much for joining me in this conversation today. Thank you to everyone who watched. Hope you continue to engage in these discussions throughout Trans Awareness Week, everyone. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks.